out, he could deal with it, and we would run.
Just take a seat.
We walked the road for a bit longer, constantly looking behind us. I felt as if we were being watched. The hair on every inch of my body was standing straight up, and it wasn't from the cold. A was beginning to struggle, and since they had a heart condition, we did not want to risk it. To be honest, I was far more worried about getting my friends out and safe than myself. Regardless, I ended up calling a relative, who thankfully only lived 3 minutes down the road, to come get us. They dropped us back at the cars, and they insisted on coming with me for the drive back. They didn't want me to be alone. But my eyes were more focused on the woods than the road on the drive back, and even then we could see them from my relative's house. We rested there, getting new clothes and the adrenaline out of our system. The drive back to A's house was silent, and the rest of our evening was spent in uncomfortable debates and research of what the heck that thing was. Now, like I said, this happened a while ago. I asked some people at work what that could have been. Not a single one of them knows of any animal that whistles like that. The crazy part? We're considering going back, more prepared this time. It really is a beautiful area, but there's definitely something in those woods. We intend to find out what. Theories and ideas are much appreciated. I've been stocking up on cryptozoology books and knowledge, stuff about the paranormal, and even the history of those woods in particular. If we do go back, this time we'll be ready. Skinwalker in Tiffin, Ohio. From Josh H. The events of this story happened yesterday at the time of writing this. I'm a freshman in high school. My school year is almost over. Towards the end of every school year, I'll have a night, usually on a Saturday, when I invite a friend or two over to stay at my place. On the Saturday in question, I invited one over. We'll call him G. G and I have been close friends ever since 5th grade, and we both enjoy things we would consider creepy. I live in a nice, wealthy neighborhood, which makes it have a nice look at nighttime. The past few times I've invited him over, we've walked around the neighborhood at night, and we've had deep conversations about personal things going on in our lives. This night was no different. We started our walk at around 1:30, visiting our usual stops to walk around the neighborhood. After about an hour, I came up with the idea to visit the old house I used to live in. This house wasn't too far from my old one, but it would take some time since we were walking. My old house was down a rocky lane about a mile long and resided in the woods. G was down for the idea, so we started our way there. It took us about an hour total. This rocky lane usually has corn stalks on both sides, but farmers weren't growing crops during this time. So there was just a field of small cut corn stalks on our left and right. The moment I set foot on that rocky lane, a wave of nostalgia hit me. A flood of old memories from this property.
Spike down, B.
But I pushed that all to the back of my mind and continued on, talking to G about the relevant topic.
New fight, new tactics.
We walked for maybe 10 minutes, then we were finally at the tree line. I don't mean to make the story sound all cliché and dramatic here, but the entrance to the woods looked more eerie than I recalled.
Can I get a drop?
Something about it just gave me the chills. Deep down, I didn't want to walk any farther, but we were about to be where we wanted to be. I told myself we would keep going for a little longer, then we would turn back and start heading back home. As we got closer to the tree line, I started to hear footsteps. I tried to chalk this up to a deer or a typical forest animal, but that's when we heard it. A blood-curdling cry from a woman erupted from the forest. It turned this quiet night into something of nightmares. The scream lasted for about 3 seconds, and without stopping, the scream turned into a growl from some kind of animal I've never heard before. Now I know what you may be thinking to yourself. It must have been a coyote, or even a mountain lion. I can see where someone would assume that, but you'd have to be there to know what I mean.
Yeah, I know you got the
I've
good
listened
stuff.
to videos of those animals. After hearing them, I can confirm it wasn't that, and these calls weren't coming from a person either. We halted to the end of the drive. While we ran, I looked back for only half a second, and I could have sworn I saw something standing on two legs, watching the two of us run away. It was skinny and tall. It had to have been at least 6'3". Once we made it to the end of the driveway, and I was confident nothing was following us, we took a moment to catch our breaths. We were both trying to keep a calm composure, but truly, the two of us were terrified on the inside.
One enemy remaining.
After that quick breather, we started to speed walk back to my place. After a while of walking, I looked behind us, and I saw something walking on four legs at the end of the driveway. It wasn't walking like a coyote would. It looked more like a person who was trying to crawl on four legs.
They couldn't kill us.
Its kneecaps were up at the top of its head, and the figure was incredibly skinny. I told G, and we started to walk even faster. My brother is a night owl, so after 5 more seconds of walking, I decided to pull out my phone, and I told him to pick us up as soon as possible. He got to where we were fairly quickly, and together, safely, we drove back home. G and I were speechless. We had no idea what to think or say. Eventually, we began discussing what we
Spike
thought
down,
that
B.
thing could have been. I'm not sure why this idea popped into my head at the time, but my first thought was Skinwalker. We looked up the noises of animals that lived in that area to see if it could have been something harmless, something normal. But nothing we looked up made a noise anywhere near what we heard. We fell asleep that night, or morning,
Spike
at 5
planted.
a.m. I woke up only 2 hours later, and I could not go back to sleep. All I could think about was what happened just a few hours ago. G woke up at around 11. He stayed at my house until he had to leave at 4. Once he was gone,
One enemy
I
remaining.
went over to my brother's place to discuss with him what had happened. As it turns out, my old house resides on Native American territory. It then occurred to me that what we likely encountered was a skinwalker, after all. My brother also told me that he thought he heard a woman's voice in the corner of his room that night. A voice that had said, "You saved them." Everything mentioned here happened last night, and I'm still scared to death. We all agreed not to tell anyone that wasn't close what happened, and to stop walking at night and never return there again. That's an agreement we will stay true to forever.
Cover going out.
Not deer. From When Ghosts Come Out. So this story is just a short one. Nothing long, just a little spooky tale. But it's the strangest, too. It takes place in a house located in Michigan. This home was built in a cul-de-sac neighborhood, with woods behind it, houses, a wood line, and a cow pasture in front of it. We had seen and heard this thing quite a few times, but at least I wouldn't come to terms with it until years later. I don't know if you've heard, but there are these
Planted.
creatures, very creepy ones. There are skinwalkers, which can take the form of another creature, and the Wendigo, which has some depictions of it resembling a deer or elk. I think both are said to be able to mimic voices. Now, the place we lived in at the time was definitely haunted. I know that for sure because we would have ghostly activity happening almost regularly. One night, my sister was in her room sleeping at the time. She woke up in the
Last
middle of the
player
night.
standing.
She said she recalled feeling just not right. When she looked over at her
I
window,
don't care if there
she
are
saw
5
this
of them or
shadow.
50 of them.
Not the
Let's
shadow
go.
of a person or anything like that, This shadow reflected from the neighbor's light. She said it looked like a deer's head with antlers.
I need this.
Whatever it was, its shadow was just standing there at her window. It was there for a minute before it eventually disappeared. There were no branches or any
Don't hold
trees
back.
there,
Need a drop?
nothing that could have made that shadow. Besides, that wouldn't explain why it just disappeared. She freaked out. She told us that very next morning, but never found any logical explanation for it.
Spike down B.
There were times where we would often leave our front door open during the night
My
before heading
ultimate's
off to
ready.
bed. We would hear coyotes and the neighbors' dogs going off every once in a while.
One
But there were
enemy
these two
remaining.
nights I'll never forget.
Last
One
player
night our dad
standing.
had the door open again as usual, when suddenly we heard these loud screaming sounds coming from the cow pasture. It caused our dogs to bark, and we were all freaking out, wondering what it could be.
Link breaks the rest.
After hearing this a few times, it just stopped. No more screaming, just silence. We never heard it again until another night came around, a year later, right around the same time of year as before. The screaming came again. This time we were just watching TV in the living room with the door open, when once more, the screaming returned. It was coming from the woods. They were so loud, they echoed through the entire woods and neighborhood. It kept going for a while before it just stopped. After that, we'd never hear them again. I personally think we could have encountered either a Wendigo or Skinwalker, because everything that's happened kinda all adds up to it. I'm not saying that's a certainty, but I
Spike
personally think
planted.
it could have been.
One enemy remaining.
I really hope it's just a dream my sister had, or perhaps a branch in the window that night, even though I know deep down that doesn't make any sense. There are strange things in this world we can't explain, and some are downright terrifying. We've since moved out, and we've yet to experience anything like it again.
Okay, I only have like
Something
78
stalked me
grenades
at
left.
Camp Buck
Hopefully that's
Tom's.
enough.
Trade.
From Vale Kyogre.
Can we please gun trade?
I live in Tennessee, and I have all my life. As a kid, I was in the Boy Scouts,
Want a
mostly
gun
to
and
make
I'll
my
buy
mother
it,
proud.
And you give it to me, please.
Here in Tennessee, we have a big scout camp called Camp Buck Tom's.
Let's
It's
start
a
this
massive
party.
camp with gun ranges, archery, and everything for Boy Scout fans and whatnot.
You want to
I was
play?
made to go
Let's
as my
play.
troop was going there.
Cover going
I
out.
think this happened in 2010, a long time ago now. There were several other troops there and many other campgrounds, with hundreds of kids and adults in different campgrounds, with all the bathrooms a decent walk from the campsites,
Spike
and
down
showers
A.
even farther away. My first day there, I oddly felt as if I was being watched whenever I was walking alone. Mind you, the buildings were
One
far and
enemy
few
remaining.
between, and it was mostly dense Tennessee forest. The feeling never faded the second day there, but even that couldn't have prepared me for the third day.
Oh my God,
Every
guys.
day after
Look,
supper,
I got
the troop was to shower in a community
Oh,
shower with
yeah.
each other. Being a shy person, I didn't really like that, so I asked if I could wait. The scoutmaster told me yes,
You're cool,
but if I
guys.
waited, I was gonna have to walk to the showers alone. I argued about the buddy system and got told that scoutmasters don't have time to wait on those that are picky. So I swallowed my pride and waited. About 45
Thank
minutes
you.
later, my troop came back, and it was getting dark. It was about 7:30 p.m. in the evening, and I gathered my things and began to walk. Being one to talk to myself whenever I'm frustrated, I vented to myself as I walked, not noticing until about halfway to the
One
showers
enemy remaining.
that the normally active woods
Spike
around me
down
had
B.
gone silent. Now, I'm no hunter or whatnot, but even as a kid, you know silence like that is usually a
Flawless.
bad sign. So I picked up the pace and continued my way to the showers.
Careful now.
My bird
At a certain
never
point,
ends.
I heard a low, raspy growl and the sound of rustling leaves. As a kid, I was scared, and I began to run, hiding quickly in the shower building, which had a
Not
towel closet one
twain.
person could fit in with some
Please,
squeezing.
guns.
I squeezed in quickly and shut the door as quietly as I could. I began to hear those sounds getting closer and closer. Then there was quiet. For about 2
thank
minutes,
you.
it stayed quiet. So I stayed as quiet as I could. Through a crack in the door, I saw it. A tall,
Watch out from
it looked
behind.
like a person, almost, but with no lips, no hair, and it was horribly skinny. Its hands were spindly, and the tips looked like claws. Its teeth were reddish yellow, and its gums were black. It stepped into the building and walked around, growling and hissing in a raspy tone. I began to tremble, almost crying, but I held it back.
Spike planted.
Eventually, this strange creature slipped back out the door, but I stayed hidden in there. I couldn't bring myself to just step out. I shut my eyes and simply waited for someone else to find me. Eventually, I was found by another troop,
One
and I
enemy
walked
remaining.
back after their scoutmaster let me use the master's shower near their camp. I never went back, and I left the scouts that very same month after my mother gave me approval. Listen well, never walk in the woods around that camp alone. And if you ever hear a raspy growl, turn and run back to your camp.
I'll leave.
Don't test fate or luck
Kind of.
like I did.
Thank you.
Never hike the Appalachian Trail alone. From B. Morrison.
I need this.
Growing up, my thing had always been walking alone in the woods. I was a creative writer in school. My attention span now is far too gone to finish much writing these days. But back then, I would take a stroll through the woods to get my writing done. Just me, a pencil, and a notebook. Heck, sometimes I'd even listen to Silent Hill and Parasite Eve OSTs. Some of those tracks were pretty creepy too. Yet it never creeped me out. Being alone in the woods listening to music that could be eerie, I never did feel afraid. This single experience, however, has left me with a feeling of dread at the mere thought of going back in the woods
One
alone.
enemy remaining.
I still venture out there, but that peace of mind I used to have just isn't there anymore.
Last round.
I work
before
at a
the
call
switch.
center. I have weekends off, and I was single at the time, with not too many friends. I would frequently spend my weekends hiking and camping along the Appalachian
Defenders
Trail.
win.
I lived only 2 hours from it, and the drive itself was usually quite relaxing too. Solo hiking and camping can be difficult, and it's not something I recommend for inexperienced hikers. Even if you follow a forecast, weather can turn unexpectedly. The rare large animal encounter can happen, and sometimes you can put yourself in a very dangerous situation when you've got no one with you. I sprained my ankle once on a trail in the nearby mountains. I was miles deep, and having gone in alone, I had to trek back, limping all the way. Not a fun experience. On a cloudy Saturday morning, I woke up early, gathering my things and venturing forth to the Appalachian Trail. A couple of hours of a drive there, I arrived. No rain at all just yet, though the sky would remain overcast for the duration of my journey. I'd planned on a one-night camping trip. I wouldn't go too deep. I had some plans the following day for my sister's baby shower, and I didn't plan on missing it. The hike in was smooth. The air that day was just the right pressure and humidity. It was an especially comfortable hike. I never would have expected what would soon transpire. I hunkered down
Match
under a poplar
found.
tree, chowing down on a Cliff Bar. Then I finished off my first bottle of water. I looked around as I enjoyed my brunch, trying to remember the names to the numerous different trees and shrubs around me. Then I thought about a meeting I'd have to come in early for on Tuesday. It was around then I saw something that made my heart lurch. A human figure at the top of a dead tree about 20 yards to my right. It was small. I could very clearly make out a small coat, pants, shoes, and hair. What in the world? I wondered. My heart raced as I picked myself up and ran over towards the tree. Surely I wasn't seeing a child stuck at the very tip-top of a tree in the Appalachian Trail, right? It was the most bizarre thing. I definitely panicked, to be honest. If this child fell from that height, they could be hurt, if they weren't already. I mean, the figure wasn't moving at all, except for their clothes blowing in the wind. "Hey, are you okay?" I called up. No response. No movement either. I gulped, my heart sinking a little farther. Now, you're probably thinking I should have called for help then. But I had a habit of leaving my phone in the car. I don't like looking at my screen too often, so on short hikes, I like to leave it behind. I was only going to be out overnight, so I thought I wouldn't need it. I made a quick decision, and I began to climb. I was in decent shape, sure, but I hadn't climbed a tree since I was 12 or 13 years old? Luckily, this tree was nearly perfect for climbing, branches all in the right places. It was only recently dead too, so none of it felt brittle yet. I had to stop several times, but eventually, exhausted, I made it close enough to the figure to reach out and touch their shoe. I poked the bottom of one of their shoes, trying to get their attention or get a response. The shoe fell the moment my finger touched it. Underneath, there was no sock, no foot. I looked closer at the rest of the figure. There was no person inside the clothes. The coat and pants were empty, and the hair, well, that was especially weird. I reached up, nearly losing my hold on the tree, and inside the hood of the coat was in fact very real human hair. Long and straight, like it belonged to a young girl. But the strand I pulled wasn't attached to anything. Oddly enough, I could see flakes of skin on the end of the strands, as if the hair had been yanked from someone's head. I felt vomit rising from my stomach. Before I could react further, I heard something below me then. Footsteps, slow and heavy. Then there was a whisper just barely louder than the wind. "Come down." The voice sounded feminine and elderly, but somehow it sounded closer to me, as if the speaker was on a nearby branch. Impossible. I was the only one up here. "Come down." It repeated without any change in its inflection. Obviously, that was the last thing I wanted to do. I stayed in that tree, clinging for dear life. But my muscles were getting weary, my limbs wobbly. "Come down." It came again suddenly after about 10 minutes of silence. I was at my limit then. I tried resting myself on the branch below me, but it was thin, forcing me to press my feet and legs forward onto it to keep my back steadily against the trunk. There was no position in which I could rest. I had to get down. "Come down." Again, I heard the whisper. The footsteps came again too. They seemed to be just below me at the bottom of the tree. But when I looked, I saw Randy. I climbed down to the next branch, my legs still wobbling. Then the next, then another, until at last I was confident I could jump down without being hurt. I took a deep breath. I remember thinking, "Go," and jumping at the same time. I hit the ground, both my knees popping, but I was fine, and I ran as quickly as I could down the trail the way I came. I didn't look back. I have no idea how I was allowed to leave.
Now I know how annoying.
Whatever I had encountered out there felt so malevolent, evil, but I ran until I saw another person whose expression was one of confusion and startlement. I smiled, panted, and continued past. Back at my car, I called the ranger station with my phone, which had been waiting on me in the glove compartment. I reported what I'd found and where I found it. I couldn't help but think then, maybe I should have run instead of climbing that tree. But the idea of the poor child falling from it while I was gone, trying to find them help, ate at me. now knowing there was no child. I felt as if I had been baited. Some subconscious part of me was telling me something had laid a trap for me. Then again, why was I allowed to leave? That was the last of it. I never heard back from anyone regarding the encounter. I've never heard of a similar experience. I've seen no news reports about a missing child. In the end, a fear of the woods now lingers with me, and I'll be staying far away from the Appalachian Trail for the time being.
Spike down mid.
Spike.
Last player
Beast of
standing.
Pope County. From Salaried Second. The town this occurred in was more or less the size of a village. The encounter happened back in mid-October of 2016, as a friend and I were out deer hunting along the ridges north of Hector, Arkansas. We had several cattle deaths before the sighting, but we'd mainly chalked it up to coyotes or coy dogs roaming the property, as it was next to the Ozark WMA. This wasn't uncommon. Livestock deaths were expected during the fall due to the high amount of predators in the area. My friend Levi, who was like a brother to me, and I had gotten out of classes early, so we rode out to the ridge that we called TL to check my family's cattle and maybe hunt some game that evening, if we saw any. Usually, the cattle would be grazing, and you could spot deer around the fence lines, which bordered the hardwood flats. Everything seemed normal that evening, except the cattle. They weren't in their normal area out on the top of the ridge. Instead, they were hiding in their lower thickets, watching a cow pace around one of the streams that
Spike
trickled down the
planted.
ridge.
Last player standing.
Now, these streams were never over 6 to 7 inches deep, and that was only if we had a downpour. I kept the cow at bay while
Okay,
Levi
I
drove
only
his
have, like,
ATV a little
17
closer to the stream
grenades left.
before waving me
Hopefully that's
over.
enough.
In the stream, there was maybe a 2 to 3 month old calf. It was dead. But it hadn't been mauled, like it would have been if coyotes had killed it. We were very disappointed. Maybe it was too weak and had drowned in the shallow water of the stream. A few days later, we had the weekend off and went hunting along that ridge. Levi managed to harvest a good-sized deer, and I was helping him drag it out. This is when we saw it. This grayish-colored beast stood up from a bramble thicket in front of us, and it let out a low and deep rumble. Levi was 5'10", and I'm around 6'2", but this thing still had at least a foot in height over me. Instantly, we both grabbed our rifles and fired at it. The beast stumbled, then screamed. I swear I saw blood bubbling from its chest then. It didn't drop though. Rather, the beast ran screaming through the brush and off through the ridgeline. "We're not tracking that dang thing," Levi said
Last player
as we
standing.
hurriedly dragged his deer to the trail, then hastily loaded it on the ATV before peeling out of that area. Not long after this, we graduated, and I moved away. Levi and I talked about the event several times after, but we always chalked it up to a bear that we spooked. But that's not quite right.
Shoot the bad
I remember
guys.
the thing
Need
having a
equipment.
canine-like face as it rose. And black bears aren't gray. Not deer in the Pacific Northwest. From Nico765. This was a strange encounter I had on a mountain trip with my friend. I've always loved forests, and I love to go on hikes whenever I can. When my friend, Kate, asked me to drive up into the mountains one day, I jumped at the offer. Kate had a usual camping spot where she liked to bring her ATVs, and occasionally she liked to drive through the woods.
Down.
She and I decided to take 2 of them down a path that went right alongside the forest with a huge valley on the left. We drove for a few minutes, admiring the view. I'd recently taken up photography as a hobby, so I was wanting to take some pictures of the trip. It was about 4 or 5 in the evening, so right around dusk. I was driving along the path when I saw a few deer
Last
in the
player
trees.
standing.
I
Spike
stopped,
planted.
hoping to get a nice picture. Kate kept on going, but I shouted at her that I would catch up in a second.
If you must fall,
I took my camera out of my backpack, dismounted the ATV, and walked a little closer to the group of deer. I stepped on a stick, though, and the deer looked over at me, then ran away. Dang it, I thought. That's fine. There's probably more deer around. Before I turned back, I noticed there was still one deer eating grass in those trees. I crept a little closer, trying not to make any noise. The thing whipped its head around, and all of a sudden, I was terrified. Note, I've lived around this area my whole life. I've always known how to deal with animals, and I've practically lived alongside raccoons, hawks, elk, etc. So I had no reason to be scared of this deer. I was about 20 feet away from it, so I wasn't close enough for it to kick me or attack me or anything. But the moment those eyes met mine, I knew something was wrong. This was not a normal deer.
Spike down mid.
The eyes weren't the average soft black eyes of a doe. They were gray, cold. I swear they were human-like. Then it growled. It wasn't a canine growl, it sounded more like a person trying to imitate a growl. It was deep and angry, and it rattled me to my core. Its teeth were big and sharp, and by no means the teeth of an herbivore. It was then when I knew I needed to go.
kill my copy.
I backed up slowly for a few steps, still staring at it, straight in the face.
Grenade!
Then I turned, and I booked it back to the ATV, hopping on, making a beeline in the direction that Kate went.
There.
As the wind rushed past me, I gradually heard the birds chirping in the trees. I noticed only then that when I saw that deer, the forest had gone completely silent. I soon caught up to Kate, who motioned for us to take the loop around instead of back the way we came. Eventually, we got back to our campsite, and I
player
thankfully
standing.
locked myself in the car.
Spike planted.
I didn't tell Kate, her being the most skeptical person I know. When she finished loading the ATVs back into the trailer, we started on our way back home.
Where are you?
We drove along the forest
Mark
path,
one.
and as we were about to leave the woods, I happened to look back. Two shining gray eyes stared right into my face, and I heard that growl in my ears.
Look your enemy in the
I
eye.
shivered then,
It helps
Can someone
with
get this?
accuracy.
and it was gone.
Thank you. Can I get a drop?
All I saw then was a dark shadow limping its way through the trees.
Defenders win.
The following are two stories submitted by Anthony 1997. Warning: the following story contains depictions of violence against animals. A skinwalker in the pig pen. This encounter happened half a year ago. It has caused me to move away from the home I grew up in, the woods I've always played in, hunted in, etc. A place that was for the most part always happy was torn to bits. My mama is full-blooded Cherokee and moved off the reserve to marry my papa. So I'm no stranger to folktales and stories of skinwalkers and so on. Now, I'm from what most people call the sticks. It's an hour's drive to get into town and 3 hours to the nearest big city. As such, we raised our own chickens, pigs, cows, etc. for milk, eggs, and meat. One week, the pigs were beginning to act off.
Match found.
They weren't rolling around in the mud. They were all huddled in the corner of their pen and did not want to move, not even when we brought them food. Then one morning, I got up to go tend to the chores, collect eggs, milk the cows, and feed the pigs. But when I made it to the pig pen, I found 2 pigs lying dead, chunks of flesh ripped from them. I sighed, told my dad about it, and we removed the dead pigs from the pen and buried them. Supernatural things aren't uncommon where I live, but this seemed like a pack of coyotes just got into the pig pen, so I left it at that and I set up the next night with my shotgun, watching the pig pen, ready to shoot anything that got too near and hopefully scare off the rest. But nothing happened that night. In fact, nothing would happen for the next month. It was all normal, other than the fact that coyotes were howling more than usual. During that time, I bought an RV. I moved it into the backyard until I could find a spot to stay at for good. One night, I heard the pigs squealing a lot, and the coyotes were going mad. They sounded really close. By the time I got up, threw on some clothes, and grabbed my shotgun, the coyote howls and pig squeals had morphed into a single sound, and it was doing this over and over. I walked out into the pig pen and looked them over. Nothing seemed out of place yet, until I caught a glimpse of a pig out of the pen. I turned and chuckled at it, saying, "Come on, bud, let's get you in there before the coyotes get you." I took a step toward it, and then it let out a bone-chilling screech. I stopped dead in my tracks. That's not the sound pigs make. I readied my shotgun, and I realized it was looking at me. I could feel heat from its eyes staring into my soul. I aimed and shot, but it didn't flinch. Instead, it stood up and laughed. I could see legs that looked more human, with hooves for feet and hands. It screeched again, and I took off running. I made it back to my RV and slammed the door. I looked out the window then, and I saw that thing slowly walking to my RV door. It tried to open it, and it began to beat against it, screeching. The RV felt as if it was going to be tipped over when suddenly it stopped. It wasn't long before I began to hear crying. This sounded much more human, but also like it was being run through an old TV that was thrown into a bathtub of Jell-O. I looked out, and it was still staring at me, but now it was crying. I pushed a chair against the door and went to lie down, trying to ignore it. It followed me to the closest window, continuing to cry, and now occasionally tapping on the glass. This went on for a long time, but stopped all at once. With the return of silence, I finally fell asleep. But the next day, when I went to check
One
on the
enemy
pigs,
remaining.
I found them all
Spike planted.
dead, torn apart. To this day, I'm convinced it was a skinwalker. It's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Flawless.
The mongrel. My experience with the mongrel happened 2 years ago. Now, I'm not sure if this creature has another name, but it's what my family calls it. They've always told stories about how the mongrel attacked them, chased them out of the woods and after their cars. I've always thought it was just a story to keep the kids out of the woods after dark, since panthers and mountain lions and rattlesnakes are quite common in the area. Back when I was younger, I was heavy, to say the least. After a girl I had a huge crush on rejected me, I decided it was time to lose weight and to change my lifestyle. I began working out. I bought a bench press, weights, and a lot of supplements. One day I didn't get off work in time to do my midday jog through the woods. I got home and started lifting weights. After about an hour of that, I decided it wasn't too dark to go jogging, as long as I brought my .357 Magnum. I got ready, put my holster on my hip,
Last
and went to
player
go out the
standing.
front door when Dad stopped me. "Son, you really shouldn't go out this late. You remember what your aunts, uncles, and myself have said is out there."
Spike
I laughed
planted.
and said, "Dad, I'm not afraid of that little kid's story anymore." I closed the door, put my headphones in, and started my jog. I got halfway through our portion of the woods, and I started to feel uneasy, more than usual. I took out one of my headphones and kept jogging. I got to where I usually turn around to go back home, when I saw this beautiful white dog lying in a bush. Knowing that the neighbors keep dogs, and frequently buy new ones, I figured it was one of theirs. I called out to it, saying, "Come here, boy." A mistake I wish I'd never
The
made.
monsters that fade command
stood
are
up and looked at me.
imitations at best.
Its eyes were
does
glowing
not
red as if
frighten me.
hellfire was inside them. I nervously muttered, trying to joke it off. "Those are some, crazy eyes, buddy." And I chuckled. But I froze because I heard it laugh back at me. I felt a chill run down my spine then. I heard it do it again, chuckling at me, and I had this feeling that I needed to leave now. I took off running, and it watched me as I did. When I looked back again, I swear I saw it smiling. It stretched and took off running. Before I could react, it had gone from 40 feet away from me to only 20, getting closer and closer by the second. Eventually, I stopped looking back. It was almost as if I could feel its hot breath on my neck. I heard paws hitting the ground right behind me, followed by a sharp pain in my shoulder. But I kept running. I got to the house and slammed the front door shut.
Spike down.
Dad
B.
walked up to me and
Last
asked,
player standing.
"What's wrong, son? Did you see it?" I said, "No, Dad, what? I just heard a panther screaming, that's all." And I laughed it
Spike
off.
planted.
I went into my room and noticed I was bleeding. Something, probably it, had scratched me. It was only a single claw mark, though. If anyone has experienced a similar creature and knows the correct name, I'd love to hear it.
Reloading.
Airsoft at night. From Airsoft Sniper. I'm a big fan of airsoft, but it is an expensive hobby. When you love something, you don't mind spending a little money on it. Every airsoft range I've been to never lets you have matches after dark, for good reason. But when this happened, I was still pretty new to airsoft, and I quickly learned my lesson. I just finished a team deathmatch, and luckily won by just one life left. My team and I laughed at how hard that match was when my phone suddenly rang. I saw that my cousin, Tamara, was the one calling, so I answered. "Hello, what's up?" "Hey guys, I got a few friends that want to play airsoft. You think you could help us?" And I answered her. "I'll see what I can do. I'll need to know how many want to try it out." There were some whispers on the other side, and after a few seconds,
Last player
Tamara
standing.
replied. "So we'll be with 4 people. Okay." I gathered some info and we planned the first airsoft match with them for 2 weeks later. Eventually, the time came. Tamara and her friends arrived that morning before their first match. I saw her coming out of her car with her pitch black hair followed by 3 other people. So 4 total on their side, including a guy I never expected to see. As I walked out the front door to greet them, I was introduced to the 2 I didn't know, Caleb and Trish. I grabbed the most familiar hand there, belonging to Gregory, telling him it's been ages. And I discussed how I was eyeing an MP40 at a local airsoft store, and I was gonna go there today. So we went with the entire group. They were eyeballing some expensive guns. I looked around for some sidearms like a Glock, but my cousin Tamara was hypnotized by a Super Hawk 6. We checked out, and I ended up getting a free Magnum too. That night we talked about strategies. I told them flat out, running and gunning isn't going to cut it. It's not a Call of Duty game, but a real-life game. We also talked about the guns that they were going to use, so I got everyone's loadouts ready for tomorrow. Not long after, everyone including myself went to bed. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, and I saw light coming from the room Tamara was spending the night in. When I opened the door, I saw her sound asleep in the bed. I turned off the light, closed the door, and decided to check on some things. The following morning, everyone loaded their loadout into my truck, and my cousin and her friends had their first match together. Of course, we lost since there was no good communication
Spike down
between the
B.
team,
Last player
so
standing.
naturally we talked about the flaws and had our second match, which we also lost.
take
On the
flight.
drive back, morale was down. Everyone was
planted.
quiet until I said, "Hey, guys, you need to follow the plans and communicate, right? We'll practice that the moment we get back home." The rest of the day followed as I expected it.
Listen
At
up.
dinner,
Kill
though,
them before
Tamara
they kill
said,
us.
"I might have just found a location where we can practice, and it's in the woods nearby as well." Naturally, I replied, "Well, airsoft is not supposed to be played after dark, okay?" Caleb said, "Look, dude, quit being a wussy." I tried pointing out that Caleb had performed the worst out of all of us. "Okay, calm down, you two. Yes, Caleb, you suck. And yes, our communication was worthless, but that's why we need to practice," Tamara shouted. "I've even got some night vision goggles." At that point, I gave in and just said, "Okay." We quickly got our things together. We then drove to the location that Tamara gave me. We arrived at what looked like a mansion ready to collapse.
Stay down.
We got all our things out of the truck. Suddenly, a guy walked up to us, asking, "Hey, y'all the ones they called?"
Last
Tamara
player
answered
standing.
excitedly, "Yep, that's us." The man then explained, "Look, you got the hills to yourself and this old house." At this
Enemies
point, I was
close.
beginning to get
Eyes
a
up.
weird feeling, a disconcerting feeling. I tried shrugging it off, though, and we decided to go for a free-for-all type of match. So I decided on using a ghillie suit. I went inside the decaying mansion. I heard a sudden thud coming from a different room nearby, and I heard my cousin say, "Hey cuz, you ready?" Of course, I replied, "Sure thing, let's get this started." We came to an agreement to activate our night vision
over!
goggles after
You're
5
dead!
minutes. I ran to higher ground and laid down in my ghillie suit, fully focusing on the mansion. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap, but since I'd gotten used to being a sniper and wearing a ghillie suit, I decided to remain as still as possible, waiting to get a free shot on whoever came near me. After the agreed upon time, I fired up my night vision goggles, and thus began our nighttime airsoft free-for-all match.
One enemy
As I lay
remaining.
there,
My ult's
I saw
ready.
Trisha run inside.
One left.
I took a shot at her and hit her. She raised her hand to show that she was hit, and in this case, she was out.
Can't see them yet.
I then heard footsteps right next to my head, and I froze. The footsteps slowly went from my head towards the mansion, and through my night vision goggles, I saw something that made my breathing stop. It was a foot that seemed to belong to a corpse. It was only then that I truly noticed a foul stench of rot and decay. Those feet quickly gained momentum, though, running off towards the mansion. I awoke from my stupor moments later, and I texted Tamara that we needed to stop right away and hightail it out of there. Before I could explain that someone was here that shouldn't be, she replied, "Hey, I just saw you running into the mansion. You're all mine now." I quickly wrote, "No, that's not me. It's not someone from our group. I think we need to leave right now." Right as I sent it, I heard every gun go off in the mansion. I ran like the wind, and as I arrived, Tamara ran
down,
out,
B.
looking surprised, saying in a startled voice, "Wait, you were me a second ago." "No, Tamara, I need you to text everyone that the match is over now. We're leaving,"
One enemy
I
remaining.
commanded. We heard more guns going off, followed by a terrifying scream. Airsoft can leave you with bruises at the most, so if Tamara's friends had been shooting at
Revealing
this
area.
intruder, they had done nothing but tee it off. Trisha and Gregory then ran out of the mansion, with Gregory saying, "Holy crap, something was chasing us."
Once I reveal them, make
I
sure
told
to take
them,
advantage.
"Get in the car, start it, and don't ever turn that engine off."
Out of here.
Suddenly, another of Tamara's friends ran out of the mansion too, screaming, "Run, you idiots!" We listened. We all ran to the truck as fast as we could. Tamara got behind the wheel and she floored it. Since I was in the boot, I put my night vision goggles back on. I had to know if the intruder was following us.
You
I
want to
saw
play?
it then.
Let's
A
play.
figure that looked more like a decaying corpse. A face that was more bone than skin. "Faster, Tamara, faster!" I
Spike
called to her.
down A.
Tamara was gunning. When we finally made it back to my place, Everyone immediately was afraid, and I followed their example. Later that night, I did once again wake up. That feeling of paranoia returned to me, so I decided to look outside. In the distance, I swear I saw two glowing yellow eyes. Just in case, I checked every door and window in the house. Even after that, I had a hard time going
Last
back to
player
sleep.
standing.
Only Gregory and Tamara are now still into airsoft, and at moments they bring up that night.
Spike
I've never
planted.
gone and done anything with airsoft in the dark after that, because if you saw what I saw, you would never even want to set foot outside in the dark again. I don't know what it
Wipe the
was,
pins from your guns.
but I'm pretty scared.
Just good crime scene.
From Felix.
Gotta go.
I was on vacation in the US, specifically in Virginia. I'm a big fan of scary stories. I like to read about cryptids and ghosts, etc. Well, during this vacation, I was on my way back from an amusement park. It was already
into the
after dark,
unknown.
and we were on this road, surrounded by deep forest. Almost everyone in the car was sleeping by then, except for the driver and my parents. And me, of course. I stared out the window and listened to some scary stories. It was then that I saw these two red dots. They were about 2 meters off the
Spike
ground.
down B.
I turned my head the other way. I thought it was just a reflection of the car's lights. When I turned my head back, the red dots were gone. I brushed it off. Again, it wasn't enough to warrant any suspicion. I focused on my stories and continued to relax. But suddenly I began to shiver. The thing was, I wasn't cold. I looked back in the woods.
Last player
It was
standing.
then that I felt like someone or something was watching me from behind those trees. The paralyzing feeling of fear came over me like a wave. I couldn't move then, and I felt as if I didn't want to. I simply stared at
with
the
numbers,
trees,
anything can
unable
still
to
happen.
move,
Remember-
unable to blink. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a big rock, but when I focused on it, I knew that it wasn't a rock. Whatever it was had dark gray skin that looked as if it was melting. I could see its ribs under its skin.
Yo,
It was sitting or crouching. I saw its 2 long, skinny hands and legs. I was glad I didn't make eye contact with this creature. It was looking the other way at the moment. I only saw it for a second or two before a truck covered the woods. When I could see the trees again as the truck passed, this weird creature was gone. But that feeling of paralyzing fear
Spike down B.
remained. It still felt as if I were. Then came a wave of regret as I suddenly remembered a conversation I had with my cousin not long ago. We discussed skinwalkers, made jokes about
One enemy remaining.
despite there being a rule that you should never say its name out loud. A couple of days passed by. I thought I was safe by then, but something visited me in my dreams, and that same exact feeling of paralyzing fear washed over me. That
Last
creature
round
appeared
in
before
the
me.
half.
It
Nothing
said
will be
something,
saved after
but I didn't understand what it was. When I finally woke up, it took me a while to be able to move. I was so scared. To this day, I'm really creeped out by these events, but still very, very curious.
Brand for dry and sensitive skin.
Let us hunt.
Feel assured. Feel QV.
My coworker's been replaced. From Pizza Courier 6.
The hunt begins.
I know it sounds crazy, but I think my coworker was replaced
Scanning ahead.
by someone. I want to start this story by saying I've lived in Nevada all my life. I like it here, and I generally enjoy the desert life, though it can get a bit too hot at times. So I've been working at a pizza restaurant for a while now as one of the cooks. However, I'm also trained to man the register and to take phone orders.
Spike down
Pretty much
B.
whatever part of the pizza making and selling process they need me at the most.
Last player
It's an okay
standing.
job. At this point, I've gotten pretty tired of the free pizza, but overall, it's a fine job. One of the more enjoyable parts is when I work with one of my favorite coworkers, Jim.
Flash out.
Jim is a screwball who loves to play pranks and mess around, generally trying to make work fun for himself, as well as everyone else that's on his shift with him. Our manager doesn't really have a problem with it, since
Switching
despite all the
sides.
fun he has, he works as hard as he plays,
Where
if not
will they go
harder.
this time?
And we usually make more in tips and sales when he does work, versus when he doesn't.
Here.
I'm a bit more reserved than Jim, but once he gets going, basically everyone follows suit and has fun together. It honestly doesn't even feel like work sometimes. Jim has also done more team building for me and my coworkers than anything corporate has done. He throws parties pretty often and usually goes bar hopping most weekends. It's been super great to get to know and become friends with Jim. However, like the title to this story states, I don't think he's Jim anymore. More so, whoever is showing up to work looking like Jim, it isn't Jim. See, Jim's parties were less than legal. When you live in a state that's like 95% desert, you can really do all that illegal stuff pretty easily. To put it simply, a lot of illegal substances, a lot of fireworks, and allowing our younger coworkers to drink. Looking back at these parties he threw, I can say they were all terrible, horrible ideas, but at the time, in the moment, they were the coolest thing ever. See, I also
Last
never really
player
partied
standing.
much in high school myself. I was straight edge. Only parties I went to involved Smash Bros. And pizza until 3 a.m. They were fun, but they weren't the same kind of freedom Jim gave me and everyone else. The final party he threw was one of his best. He set it up as an ABC party, or an anything but clothes party, meaning all our coworkers and any of the friends outside of
One
work
enemy
Jim said we
remaining.
could invite, myself and Jim's self included, weren't allowed to wear clothes and instead had to wear everyday objects and the like instead. Most of them showed up in togas made from bed sheets and blankets, which is what I did. Jim, on the other hand, decided to wear the various deer and bear pelts from his father's hunting lodge, which, looking back, may be why he was targeted. Other people important to the story are Susie, our part-time coworker and my full-time crush at the time the party occurred, who wore pizza boxes from work all taped together, our manager Andy, who was wearing a suit made out of duct tape, and Laura, our friend from outside of work who decided she'd wear purple balloons to look like grapes, and resident cryptid nerd. I know Susie was the one who came up with the idea later in the night to tell ghost stories. We had run out of fireworks by then, and most of us were high, so it sounded like a good
The
idea.
fight demands it.
She went first, telling a story about a skinwalker. While telling the story and also explaining to a lot of drunk people what a skinwalker is, she must have had a plan with Andy, as he suddenly popped out at the scariest point in the story to frighten a lot of the girls. Most of us laughed it off. Maybe it's because Susie's story was so good, but a lot of the folks there, some of whom had asked moments ago what a skinwalker even was, chimed in with their own tales of it. At all of this, Laura pulled me aside from the bonfire to talk. Hey, I think we need to change the subject, she said. Why? I asked. Are you scared or something? Or something, you jerk. I just think we've said it enough.
Last player
I
standing.
don't understand what you're saying. They are attracted to whoever or wherever its name is spoken. Oh, do you mean skinwalker? Shh, don't say it, she said as she drunkenly covered my mouth with her hands. But they're not real, Laura. Susie made them up, right?
I hate making you. I'm out of
God,
here.
you're an idiot sometimes. No, they're from Native American folklore. So, what? There's really people out there that can turn into animals?
Reloading.
I don't know. I just know my mom told me to never say their name like that, especially not repeatedly. But why? I remember asking dumbly.
Ah, break's over.
Because they're attracted to it. If we keep saying it, they'll come here, she pleaded. I didn't really believe, but I wished I had. Instead of listening when it was my turn, I doubled down on it, thinking I'd be able to scare Laura even more. Laura kept quiet about it though, but I think she pulled other people aside to tell them about it later that night. But a lot of this was a haze. This next part is what we pieced together later on after everything happened. First, Jen started a small game of Truth or
down
Dare
A.
with a few of our coworkers.
Last player
This led to
standing.
him and Susie getting into a fight over a dare, and Susie storming off from the game. Later on, Andy said he and Jim got into a small drinking game. He didn't remember how it went down, so I
One
assume
enemy
he probably
remaining.
My ult
lost,
is ready.
knowing how Jim held his liquor. Some of the other partygoers remembered Jim talking about seeing people standing around the bonfire, but they assumed he took some substances he didn't share with the rest of everyone.
Don't get stabbed. Bad way to go.
After that, no one else remembered what Jim got up to. From what Susie said, I went to comfort her after the fight, but then Laura pulled me away. She then made sure Andy got back to his tent and helped him inside. From there, she remembered Coyote's yipping later on in the night, but other than that, she said she just went to bed in her car. I do, however, remember what happened after I woke up. I'd apparently bunked with Laura in her car. I looked over at her with my dorky smile on my face. "Good morning, wifey," I joked. "Oh, shut up, jerk," she snapped back at me. "Someone's hungover." "No, I'm just freaked the heck out after last night. We should have gone to one of our houses after the party, not stayed in the car,"
Enemy
she
down.
explained. It was still quite early, around 4 or 5, and still a bit dark out with it being winter. We'd probably only been asleep for about 3 hours looking back on it. "Look, I saw a coyote around the cars when I got up, and I'm really freaked out. Can we just go home?" she pleaded.
I am the hunter!
"I guess. You sure it wasn't just Jim being a weirdo with those furs on?" Don't get me started on those. I had half a mind to whack him upside the head after seeing him dressed in them. Oh, sorry. I crawled to the front seat and grabbed my keys out of the cup holders, jamming them into the ignition.
Match
Laura
point.
climbed over and sat
my
in the
cameras
passenger
is
seat,
broken.
just scowling.
Oh, wait.
The car started up and we were the first ones to leave. I drove slowly so as to not wake up everyone else who was sleeping in tents and beds of trucks and other cars. However, I did notice Jim wasn't in his truck, like he usually would be. He'd always sleep in the bed of his truck, so he could fall asleep looking at the night sky, about as poetic and romantic as the guy could get. At the time, I shrugged it off.
You
In
want to
fact,
play?
I shrugged a
Let's
lot of
play.
that night and morning off, when I probably shouldn't have.
I got enemies B.
Once we were far enough away, I got up to speed and started to drive Laura and myself to my place. "I'm sorry, I didn't know all that stuff freaked you out so much," I told Laura.
Joke's over!
"It doesn't freak
You're
me out,
dead.
it's just dangerous." I still don't get how it's dangerous. You really don't believe me when I said they're
Spike
real, did
down
you?
B.
Well, did anyone you talked to last night? Just Susie, but I
Last
already
player
knew she
standing.
I was mostly just mad at her for starting it.
One enemy remaining.
If she believes
ult's
they're
ready.
real, why did she start it? You know Susie. She likes to cross the line and push buttons. A little risk for everyone to get under my skin is
out
her
of my
MO.
way.
Before too long, the subject changed to more friendly topics.
So secure.
Once we were back at my place and washing off the layer of dirt we were both covered in, we made a large meal to fight off our hangovers. That's when Andy called me. "Hey man, you and Laura already head out?" "Yeah, just had some stuff at home we needed to do." "It's no problem. That's not why I'm calling. It's Jim. I can't seem to find
I
him
will
anywhere.
hold up the sky.
Please tell me he hitched a ride with you." "No, it was just me and Laura. What are you talking about? You can't find Jim." Andy sighed and took a moment, his voice a bit shaken now. "I don't know. I checked all the tents and peeked in the car windows. I don't see him anywhere." "Could he have wandered off?" I asked, worried. "I don't know. I'll let you know if I find him. Just keep an
Spike
eye out
down
in case he
B.
does somehow wander back into town." "We'll be back
Last
as soon as we
player
can to
standing.
help search," I responded.
Got spike.
I let Laura know who that
remaining.
was and what it was about. After we were ready, we went back out to help look for Jim, leaving our breakfast behind. Once we got there, we gathered all the information I'd mentioned before. We spent around 4 hours that day looking for Jim before finally finding him. We located him passed out a good hour's hike away. I was so glad it all worked out. At least, that's what I thought at first. Jim seemed really out of it. He was even walking funny. But I just assumed he'd injured himself and had
30
taken
seconds
something
left.
way stronger than the rest of us that night. After everyone got back home, things did seem to calm down, and stuff went back to normal at first. Laura had told me Jim was acting weird one day when she stopped in to chat with him and grab lunch. But I wasn't sure if a little chat was enough time to tell if he was acting weird or just messing with her.
Here we go!
It wasn't until my shift with him that I realized what she meant. No jokes, no smiles, no fun. It was like Jim had done a 180. Instead of making fun of problem customers, he would chastise us over being rude to
Defenders
them.
win.
He stopped being as helpful as he was before, really only doing the job he was assigned to do that day and nothing else, which is very odd for anyone where I work. We all kind of understand what everyone is capable of, and we help out where we can. But now it was like Jim forgot how to be a team player. That weekend, when we asked what plans he had, he said nothing. By then, a lot of us, Susie and myself especially, were worried about him. Andy was concerned too, but tried to rationalize it, saying he must have had